Welcome to another segment of the Real Estate Corner. My name is Claudette Vickery, and I am your host. Today I have the pleasure of introducing my guest, Carol Berberian, a senior advocate and real estate liaison for Kriss Law. Welcome.
Thank you, Claudette. So nice to be here with you today.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Carol has been in real estate for 15 years. She specialized in mortgage lending, residential real estate sales, and is currently a nationwide closing coordinator for a local law firm. At some point in time, many of us will purchase a home and many of us will sell one. We will cover both aspects in this segment. Carol, let's begin with the early stages of selling a home.
Absolutely. Well, as you know, most sellers are also buyers because when they are selling one home, they do need another home to live in. So we like to start right at the beginning, before the house is even on the market, with our seller clients and work with them through every step of the process, straight through to the closing on their new home. So when they're starting to think about listing their home for sale, we always like to get in touch with them and go through a preliminary title search. This will help us identify any outstanding liens that are currently on their property. Most people will have a mortgage outstanding, maybe an equity line of credit, and there are other things that can also be tied to your home in terms of a lien that has been financed against it. So we want to make sure that everything that is outstanding is something you're aware of and can be discharged and paid off prior to selling and transferring the title to a new owner.
And so that's the first step in the actual process of selling or entertaining selling your home.
Absolutely. You want to know what you're getting into, what your next steps are, and what all the costs are associated with selling your home. You also want to reach out to a local realtor, and we have some great connections in the industry, so we're always happy to connect you with somebody who will really be able to best support your needs. We always recommend going with someone who's local, experienced, and full-time, as they're going to be the best person to get you the highest price for your home. We work closely with the real estate agents to make sure that everyone is in constant communication through the process to ensure a smooth transaction.
Typically, does everyone hire an attorney to do that title search prior to selling their home, Carol?
Many people do not. We hear from a lot of clients once the offer on their home has already been accepted. So that means that their home has already been listed for sale, been marketed by the realtor, and had an offer accepted. We like to always look at the offers before they're signed to make sure that all of the dates are realistic and the contingencies are realistic as well. We want people to understand what it is that they're signing and what they're committing to, because the offer is a legally binding contract and it is something that will set the terms for the rest of your process. But we do typically hear from people when it's time to go to a purchase and sales agreement, because it is the real estate attorney who will be drafting that document, and it's typically the seller's attorney who will draft the purchase and sales agreement on your behalf. And that's all part of our list to sell package. So in addition to getting started with you right from the beginning, we review the offer with you, we draft your purchase and sales agreement, and then we move on to the negotiations. Typically between the offer stage and the signing of the purchase and sales agreement, the buyer of your home will do a home inspection, where they'll have a licensed professional come in and look at the structural and general integrity of the property. They may look for pests. They may do a radon test to see if there's any high levels of radon in your home. And depending on what they find, they may want to negotiate a few things to be repaired, or perhaps a reduction on the price based on the findings of their home inspection. We go through that process with you as well and make sure that everything that's agreed upon is carried into the purchase and sales agreement.
So your list to sell package is a package that you afford to sellers?
Yes.
And it's a flat fee?
It's a flat fee that covers them throughout the entire process. And so not only does it cover them when they're selling their home, but it covers them right through to the closing, and it also covers them for the next home that they're buying. So there's a few more steps in the process before you can actually get to the closing table. As a seller, you have to have your deed prepared, so that way you're able to transfer the ownership of the property from the current entity that owns it, whether it's you as an individual or perhaps a family trust that owns the property, to the new buyers. we also go to the closing with you because things do come up at the last minute. People will do a walkthrough to make sure that everything that was agreed upon has been done. Any work that was to be done has been completed. Any items that were negotiated to become a part of the sale have been included. And occasionally things do come up at the last minute, so we like to be there for the sellers as they're signing those final documents. We do, of course, have sellers that don't want to go to the closing, and that's fine too. We coordinate a power of attorney for them, so we actually attend the closing on their behalf and sign everything for them.
So in terms of the steps, you make sure that there's a clean title.
Mm-hmm.
You will negotiate anything that comes up during a home inspection or the like.
Yes.
You will draw the deed. You will draw the purchase and sale agreement, draw up the purchase and sale agreement. You will review the offer. And so that's a pretty nice package.
We're really your guide throughout the process, and it's a process that many of us do not go through more than 1 or 2 times in our lives. Many people will buy 1 or 2 homes and that's it. So you're not doing this on a regular enough basis to know what comes next. And we really serve as the person that will just take your hand and hold it throughout the entire process to make sure that you don't miss a step and that everything is done to protect your interests.
In terms of right before the closing, from a seller point of view, there are certain fees that they have to pay relative to that transaction. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. Well, one of the first things that we coordinate before the closing is to obtain payoffs for anything that you do have outstanding that would need to be paid off at the time of your closing. So if you have a mortgage on your property, then we would coordinate the payoff to coincide with your closing date. So that way your mortgage loan will be paid off as of that date. We also coordinate the real estate taxes. Your real estate taxes are paid typically quarterly in most areas, and so you'll have some of your real estate taxes that you have already paid for a period that you will not actually be living in or owning your home. So the buyer will then reimburse you for the amount that you've already paid. The same goes for any oil or propane gas, so the tanks would be read prior to the closing, and you would then be reimbursed for that money. In terms of an additional fee, you do have your transfer taxes, which are set by the state limits. And Massachusetts is set, Barnstable County is different than the rest of the state, but those are set amounts based on the price of your home.
All good information. And you actually go to the closing table, or you will represent the seller if they do not want to attend. So in terms of the next step, most folks will have another place that they have in mind to purchase, and are you representing them on the other side typically?
Absolutely, and it's really nice because, again, it's a process that can be a little bit overwhelming because of all the details involved, and the stress of buying and selling at the same time, coordinating your move, coordinating 2 closings can be very overwhelming, and so it's nice to have your partners throughout the process. And again, we work very closely with your mortgage lender, such as yourself, who would be providing the financing for the house that they're buying, as well as the real estate agents who are doing the listing of the current home and helping you purchase the next home. So that way we're really with you through every step.
Great information. And with that, I will say thank you very much for joining me this evening to go over the seller aspect, the selling side of the transaction. I'm looking forward to seeing you and talking to you about the buying side.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Welcome to another segment of the Real Estate Corner. My name is Claudette Vickery. I am your host. Thank you for joining me. Today I have the pleasure of introducing my guest, Carol Berberian, a senior advocate and real estate professional at Kriss Law. Carol has been in real estate for 15 years. She specialized in mortgage lending, residential and real estate sales, and is currently the nationwide closing coordinator for a local law firm. At some point in time, many of us will purchase a house. It's a dream that many folks have. We will cover the home purchase in this segment. And I believe, Carol, there are a lot of stages to the home purchase that a lot of folks don't really take into consideration. And I think let's talk about the market in general right now.
Absolutely. The market has been incredibly hot. It's very competitive, and buyers really need to be prepared before they make an offer on their home. It's a lot more than just the HGTV side of things, where they go around and see what works for them in terms of the number of bedrooms and the style and the condition of the home. It's really more about making sure that their offer is the most competitive and the best presented to the seller. And a big part of that starts with the pre-approval, because as you know, most people do finance their home, and as our mortgage professional, you can speak more to the pre-approval process and how much that can strengthen an offer.
So prior to going out and looking for a property, to your point, Carol, a lot of realtors will not even show you a home if you don't have an official pre-approval letter in your hand. And a pre-approval letter can be very different between lenders, one lender to another. I know that you really need to focus on the pre-approval letter itself. If you have a piece of paper in hand that says you're qualified for XYZ mortgage and a home purchase of XYZ amount, you should make certain that you have provided that lender with your financial information, because if they're going by a verbal, you could run into a lot of trouble once that is presented to the lender down the road.
We just had a seller lose out on an offer because they went with the highest offer, and it turned out that the buyer did only provide verbal information to that lender, and they were not actually able to be approved.
Yeah, it's a very, very sad situation when someone thinks they have an official pre-approval letter. So I would just make certain, as a potential buyer of a property, if you do not produce those documents to a lender, you have to really question the pre-approval letter that's in your hand. So make sure that you have provided those things. They should make sure that they have provided those things.
And that's why it's also really important to go with a local mortgage professional, somebody that you know and somebody that's going to be accountable for the information that they're providing to you.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the stages. So we have an official pre-approval, we know it's valid, and we're going out shopping. And they're going out shopping with a realtor. Let's talk about what happens next.
Once they find a house, then it's the all-important moment of actually making an offer. And that is a legally binding contract that you will sign that will detail not only how much you agree to pay for this person's home, but how much of a deposit you're going to place with that offer, how much of a deposit you'll place with the signing of the purchase and sales agreement, when the offer is valid until, so that way the seller has a time frame in which they need to respond to your offer. They can't just say, we're going to hold on to this for a few weeks and see if we get a better one. They will also decide when they're going to sign their purchase and sales agreement and when they're going to close. The extended part of the offer is typically referred to as the contingency page. Sometimes this is combined into a standard offer form, but this is very important for buyers because this protects your interests, and this identifies if you plan to do a home inspection on the property to test for anything that could be potentially lying beneath the surface that you couldn't see on your first inspection of the property. It'll also detail your mortgage contingency, and the mortgage contingency further protects your deposit in case something happens and you do end up getting denied for that mortgage that you plan to take out to pay for this home. So that's all detailed in there. This is typically drawn up by the realtor and reviewed by your real estate attorney. So again, we look at it to make sure that your contingencies are the strongest to protect your interest, and also that all of your dates are reasonable, because things have changed with the regulations in the industry and also with just the current market conditions. The lenders are very busy, so the appraisers are very backed up, and sometimes you need a little bit of extra time to make sure that you're setting a reasonable expectation for the timing of your purchase.
So let's talk about the initial offer. The initial offer is made, it's presented to the seller.
So it's presented to the seller. The realtor who is working with you will typically plead your case, tell them what wonderful people you are and how much you love their home, and also really exemplify why you are a qualified buyer for this property. And a big part of that is that with your offer, they present your pre-approval letter to let them know that you have already done your homework, you are pre-approved for your mortgage, and you're ready to buy this home.
Is it typical that most folks make an offer less than the asking price?
Not in this market. We're actually still seeing some very competitive situations depending on the area that you're looking in, where people will have multiple offers received on a property. And you'll see that properties do not stay on the market very long, especially when they're attractive homes that are well priced. So the listing agents, especially in our area, are very savvy. They're very good at pricing the properties that they sell. And you'll see that they do sell very quickly because buyers know when it's a good value, someone else is going to snatch it up if they don't.
So let's talk about after the offer's been accepted.
So after the offer's been accepted, you typically do a home inspection. Some people do choose to waive the home inspection, but you do assume the risk at that point that if there are any unforeseen issues in that property, if there is mold, an issue with the foundation, the roof, anything that you didn't see upon your first inspection, you are just agreeing to take on the responsibility for that issue. Now there is the disclosure requirements. So if a seller does know of a defect in the property or that there is a problem, they do need to disclose it to you. And if they don't, that could be an issue for another segment. But generally speaking, people do a home inspection and review the finer details of the property.
So after the inspection has passed, is it typical that we go directly to purchase and sale agreement at that point in time?
That's absolutely right. And although it sounds like a few extra steps, we're really typically 7 to 10 days from the time that your offer was accepted, in which we get the home inspection done, the purchase and sales agreement negotiated, and the purchase and sales agreement signed. So as we talked about in the other segment, it's typically the seller's attorney who will draft the purchase and sales agreement. So we, as your buyer's representatives, would not only review and negotiate any points of that document that we feel need to be strengthened to better protect your interest, but we also add in a rider to the purchase and sales agreement that further spells out all of the ways that we are protecting your deposits and protecting your interests throughout the purchase.
So in terms of this rider, what would that actually detail?
It just details if anything happens to the property. So if the property is damaged between the time that you sign your purchase and sales agreement and the closing, if the damage exceeds a certain amount, you can back out of the transaction with no recourse and you can get your deposit back. It reiterates the mortgage contingency clause and when that will be signed by, and it also goes through the steps of having a clean title having to be conveyed to the buyer in order for them to close. And that's where we also come in, because we do the title exam and we go back 50 years to look at the title of that property to make sure that the owners that are conveying this to the new buyers are legally able to do that, that they are the legal owners, and that the owners prior to them also had the rights to convey that title. And we go back to make sure that everything has been paid off, and you'd be surprised, there are often times that we find a missing mortgage discharge or something that slipped through the cracks, and we have to have that rectified before the closing. We also provide the option to purchase an owner's title insurance policy. And some people will question why that's necessary since we've done such a thorough title exam. Mm-hmm. And it is very important because there are different things that can come up. If something was forged or misrepresented along the way and still recorded, you're still protected by that. If you had somebody that was not of legal age to sign, or if an heir was mistakenly left off of something when the property was transferred years ago, this will protect you. It also protects you, especially considering everything that's happened in the past decade in the banking industry. Things got a little crazy about 10 or so years ago, and there were equity lines and other lines of credit that were not necessarily put on record. They went on people's credit reports, those were paid, the bank collected, but they didn't actually get recorded. And so if those things were not paid and not recorded, they wouldn't show up in our title search. And we actually had an interesting situation where there was an equity line of credit for $60,000 on a local property that never was recorded. So when the property was sold to these new buyers, that line just kind of continued to float out there. The lender finally put it on record. It was not paid, and so they came to collect by way of an auction. These people had their title insurance policy, so rather than having to hire a separate attorney to confirm that this was a title defect and protect them, they made one call to their title insurance company who handled everything else.
That's pretty amazing. Good thing they had that coverage.
It's very important.
What would have happened if they did not have that coverage?
They would have to hire an attorney to determine what the defect in the title was, and then go through all the steps to rectify it. And in the meantime, that bank is foreclosing on that loan.
Amazing. Very amazing. So when they sign the purchase and sale agreement, they are required to put down a deposit to bind that purchase and sale agreement, correct?
Yes. So typically, they'll put down a deposit when they make the offer, and that's called an earnest money deposit. It shows that they are serious about buying the home and putting some of their money on the line to show the seller how serious they are about that. That can be $500, $1,000. That's a little bit more of an arbitrary amount. At the purchase and sale signing, you typically put down 5% of the purchase price, less that amount that you put down at the offer. And that's held in escrow, typically by the listing realtor's office.
Okay. And so we have the signed contract, we have the signed purchase and sale agreement. What happens next?
After that, then we are looking towards getting the appraisal of the property done. And this is one of the final steps in the approval of your mortgage. Because you're pre-approved, you already have your primary approval done. So your income and assets have been verified, and the underwriter is sure that you qualify for that loan on your own personal behalf. But now we need to make sure that the property qualifies. So we do the appraisal to make sure, and this is done through the mortgage company.
Absolutely.
So they will order an appraisal and make sure that the value of the property is equal to or greater than what you are buying the house for. And that leads us to your mortgage commitment letter, which satisfies the mortgage contingency, which was detailed in the purchase and sales agreement.
So let's just say the appraisal comes in shy of what the offer is. What happens?
Well, that would be up to the lender. So they can only lend on the appraised value or the purchase price, whichever is lower. And so that's when, again, they would want to have a good local representative who could advise them on what their options are in terms of changing the financing options, putting more money down, or going back to the seller and renegotiating.
That's where I want to go with this. Going back to the seller and renegotiating, do you see that often?
It comes up from time to time. The appraisals have been coming in pretty close to the value, and when they don't, the sellers are usually pretty willing to at least meet somewhere in the middle between the price and what the appraised value was.
So we pass muster, we get a mortgage commitment letter. What happens next, Carol?
Well, as I said, we've done the title search behind the scenes, so now we are just rolling straight towards the closing. So we have everything verified. All of your final numbers will come together between the mortgage company and between our office to determine what's due for your real estate taxes. What kind of insurance did you get? How much is your insurance premium on an annual basis? And what needs to be established for your escrow accounts, for your homeowner's insurance, and for your real estate taxes. We then go through all the costs of everything that is associated with the lender, any closing costs and prepaid items, the total cost of the home, less the amount of the mortgage that you're taking, and the amount that you have to bring to closing.
A lot of folks don't realize that they have to ordinarily pay that first full year premium for their homeowner's insurance.
Yes, that's definitely an expense that comes up as a surprise to some people. But again, that's why it's helpful to have all of your partners, the attorney and your mortgage lender, associated with everything that you're doing right at the beginning, because we really advise you of all of these things, so that way you can plan accordingly and make sure that you have those funds available for that first years of insurance, and it doesn't cut into your budget for anything else that you were planning on paying for with the home.
So let's talk about the closing disclosure sheet.
Sure. So the closing disclosure changed. We had a big shakeup in the industry that started a few years ago and really came into action last year, where the HUD-1 settlement statement was taken away for most closings. It still doesn't come into play with cash transactions and a few other types of closings, but for a traditional closing where you do have a mortgage that you're taking out, you now have this 5-page closing disclosure that is a more easily decipherable form to detail every single detail of your transaction. And this needs to be provided to you as a buyer at least 3 days prior to your closing. So there's no more morning of the closing wondering how much you're going to be bringing to closing and if the mortgage that you were promised is actually the mortgage that you're going to be taking out. It really protects the consumer to make sure that they are informed about their lending and what they're borrowing. And the whole premise of it is to know before you owe. And
Correct. Correct, absolutely correct. And so in terms of the buyer, they can't bring a personal check to the table, can they, Carol?
No, not unless it's a very small amount due. They typically need a bank check, certified funds, because they need those good funds to be at the table. Because as we talked about earlier, most sellers are buyers, so your seller is probably needing that money to put towards their next transaction that may be closing that very afternoon. So there's always the need for good funds at the table. So it's basically the equivalent of bringing cash with you, but you do bring it in a bank check, or the funds are wired to the attorney's account so they can be dispersed appropriately.
Great information. So buyer representation in your closing, the stages, pre-approval. Make sure that the pre-approval letter that you have in your hand is a valid pre-approval. If you did not give your lender the information, your financial information, if your lender did not run your credit, that pre-approval is questionable. Make sure you have a valid pre-approval in your hand. You will sign an offer once you have your pre-approval. You will bind that offer with a small amount of money. If your offer is accepted, you will have an inspection on that property. If your inspection passes, you will go to a purchase and sale agreement. Once that purchase and sale agreement is signed, you have a valid contract and an agreement, and your mortgage process will be streamlined because you have a pre-approval. Upon the receipt of the appraisal, if the appraisal is good and covers the mortgage amount, you will receive a commitment letter and you will go to closing. But it's very, very important, to Carol's point, that you have a good team and a cohesive unit that works together, starting with an attorney, a realtor, and a financial person. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed this segment on buyer representation, and we will see you soon.